Marcus and I, like I said, it goes back to 2008. And then we didn't really bump into each other. I hear about him in the field. And then in 2018, just before the pandemic, I bumped into him again. And over at Selenium conference here in Chicago, and said hi, and it was great to see him again. So I reached out to Marcus and see if he was if he could give us a presentation, and he kindly did. And so, Marcus, with that little history of there, I'm going to let you give a little bit better introduction to everybody. And by the way, Marcus is, I'm going to say he was one of the original automation people with QTP, UFT. So he's a Captain Mercury guy over there. In fact, I got my old Windrunner disc sitting right there as well. On my desk, I ended with it. Marcus, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks. Now I got to figure out how to share my screen at some point. All right. So yeah, I'm Marcus. I'm actually the Vice President of Technology Strategy at Sauce Labs at this point. I've been doing test automation, started with APIs in 2001, fell in love instantly with how fast and responsive they are. And for some reason, I moved into UI testing, which is, not quite so fast, not quite so responsive, but still very interesting and still very necessary. So I started using Selenium, I guess, shortly after 2008, probably. I was using Mercury QTP, and then I heard about this tool called Selenium. And then I liked it so much, I started to get involved with the leadership and just sort of started helping them organize conferences around 2012. And so I've been there not since the beginning, but since, kind of close to the beginning, and was in, kind of in the room when the standards for the W3C committee got ratified, and was in the room for a lot of different things that happened. I haven't been a huge code contributor to it, but I'm, like to just be the person in the room helping to facilitate things. I'm a member of the project leadership committee, which helps grease the legal skids to make sure that things happen properly and that budgeting happens and all that stuff. I feel like there's a lot of contributions that you can make to open source that are not just code. Like if you're good at writing documentation, if you're good at handling, like I said, legal and logistical issues, there's a lot of people who are really good at writing code for open source that don't like doing any of that stuff. So I let them do that, and they let me do this, and it's a great separation responsibilities. I have written some code for Selenium, but it's not material. There's a very minor function within the new Selenium grid that was partly mine, and some documentation, stuff like that. But anyway, right now I'm trying to convert all this knowledge of test automation over 20 years into a career as a technology strategist for one of the vendors in this space. My job at this point is to take Sauce Labs' overall offering and figure out where the gaps are, and then figure out whether we should acquire our way into filling those gaps, acquire or build or partner in order to make those kinds of things happen. So we've made 4 acquisitions. We've partnered with 45, 50 companies. We do a whole bunch of product development, that kind of thing. So I'm not here to talk about Sauce Labs today, even though it is on my slides. I'm here to talk about accessibility. This has become a passion of mine, and I hope it will become a passion of yours as well. And I'll talk a little bit about not only what it means to make your website accessible and the kinds of things you can look for, but also why it's important, and then how to work that into automation. The automation won't be the primary focus of this, because I have assumed that I'm going to try to give you some resources, and you go and you do some research on it. I am curious now whether or not ChatGPT could actually be told to, do a test script with automation, with accessibility in it. My bet is you can say, write me a Selenium script, which I've seen it do. It does very well. And then you can probably say, now implement Axe Core to test this for accessibility also. And it'll hopefully it'll add just the 2 or 3 lines of code you would need to do to sort of give you an overall idea of whether or not something the script you're working on will test for accessibility, which is fascinating. It's funny. GPT has exploded all over this industry in the last 2 weeks, and I think it's great. And you didn't ask me for a commentary on this, but I'm going to give you just a couple seconds. One is I am come at me on Twitter, but I am not a fan of Cucumber and BDD in general. And it's not because I don't think the tech works. It's because I think generally it has to be implemented culturally before you can even consider whether or not the tool can be implemented. But that said, we asked ChatGPT to give us a BDD script and then give us the step definitions, and it did a flawless job. And I think one of the problems that people get into trouble with Cucumber is they start to use their spec files to talk about web elements, to say, click on this button, fill out this form, put this in this text field, put this in this text field. And to me, I think that a behavior-driven script should not talk about web elements. A behavior-driven script should talk about user behavior, like log into this website using username, password. No click, just log in, because that's the verb the users care about. The users care about submit this form using this information. They don't care about enter text into first name, enter text into last name. They care about submit the form. Because I'm gonna make a kind of another controversial statement here, is that unless you're working on a video game or a streaming platform or a social media site, maybe a couple of others, people don't want to actually use your software. Nobody wants to use your software. They didn't come here to fill out the date picker on the flight selection. They came here to, your travel site, they came here to buy a ticket. They came here to enable themselves to get on an airplane. They didn't come here to use your fancy bells and whistles. So it's important for me that a BDD script capture the behavior that the user is trying to exhibit and not the elements of the website that you designed for them to interact with. And ChatGPT did a magnificent job of capturing the user behavior and then converting that into step definitions and then converting that into Selenium. And it did all the steps involved. So to me, it represents a really interesting leap forward in getting teams that want to adopt something like Cucumber, getting them a step up. Now, I'm not going to talk about this much longer, but basically what I'm concerned about is people leaping to the conclusion that this is going to replace our jobs, because 90% of test automation is test maintenance. 10% is test creation. And that's the part that I think GPT is going to help us with. It's not going to replace us even there yet, but I'm not sure it has any role to play in maintenance. And that's just something that we need to, time will tell whether or not that's true. That's just something to keep in mind. Okay, let's talk about accessibility, what you actually asked me here for. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. All right. Does anyone see a lot of annoying flickering, or is that okay? Paul, does that look good? Not hearing anything. All right. I'm going to launch into it, and I am assuming that chat will explode if I'm doing something wrong or if you're not seeing my screen. Okay. So today we're here to talk about testing for accessibility. And we're going to do this by talking about the kind of problems that we see in accessibility. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a recipe and some tooling for getting started, and then we'll move into automation. I'm not going to show you any code. I'm not going to inundate you with a whole bunch of tools, but I'm going to tell you enough to hopefully build a foundation upon that you can take back to your team and immediately get started with this kind of thing.
Hey, Marcus, I'm going to jump in here. The resolution looks really low on this side over here.
Fascinating. I don't know why it looks that terrible. It looks really okay on mine. That's fascinating.
Maybe try to unshare and reshare one more time. Maybe it's the equivalent of turn the computer off and on again.
Yeah, right. I actually don't know how to stop sharing. I apologize for this.
No problem. Hey, that's what we do. It's hardware and software, and things happen. It's like I said, I'm a pessimist that things actually work. I'm surprised that the internet comes up every day.
Yes. Now that's camera resolution I just messed with. So it's still sharing, because to me it shows that it is okay.
We might have to live with it. Just we'll go with full screen, but we'll see if maybe the guys behind the scenes can come up with something.
Truthfully, I don't know how to stop sharing. I think that's the problem. There it is. Problem is, I had the window was too narrow for me to see all the options that were there. Okay.
Do you have multiple monitors?
Yes, I do.
maybe a different, when you do the share, you can actually pick a different monitor, throw it onto another monitor. Let's see if that has any sort of issue, or that helps at all.
All right, so I just shared a window.
Dimitri says, no big deal. Thank you, Dimitri.
Still want to make it look like we've been here before. All right, so I've shared a window. It's not showing up yet. There it is.
Much better. You're awesome. Go full screen. You're good to go.
Great. Fantastic. All right, so what I did for anyone in the future is instead of sharing the entire desktop, I shared just the window. So troubleshooting accomplished. All right. So accessibility. Thank you, Paul, for jumping in. We're going to go over why test. Now, I'll be candid here. When I first designed this talk, it was for an audience of people who understood accessibility but not testing. So I put in a few slides about why we test. This audience probably doesn't need that, but I left just a couple of slides in so that we can find a common foundation together, because there was a talk in the last session about this track about coverage, and this question comes up all the time. How do we test for code coverage, or what coverage goals should we be looking at? And I just wanted to sort of level set and make sure we're speaking the same language when we talk about testing in general. Then I'll talk about where accessibility testing fits into the process and where it maybe should fit, because those are two different things. And then I'll cover the 10 most common accessibility issues that cover something like 95% of all accessibility issues that you find on the web. Like if you cover these 10, you're probably, you may not be AA compliant, but you will probably lessen your liability exposure. And I'll explain what that means. Then at the end, I'll give you kind of a survey of tools. It's not really a survey of tools as much as it is a survey of considerations. And so we will talk about a couple of specific tools. Okay, so one thing that I've been a little bit obsessed with lately is this concept of test coverage. At a previous job, I had actually at several previous jobs, I have had, as the head of quality assurance or the test automation person, I've had a CTO tell me, you need to deliver 100% test code coverage as part of your automation program. And my reaction to that is usually I have to, take a few deep breaths. And then I have to essentially say, is it okay for me to define what 100% means? Because there's no way you're going to get 100% test code coverage of everything that we do. It's simply impossible. And of course they dismiss that out of hand, and I try to explain, but what I found is that it's a failing argument. So basically what happens is I've stopped asking whether or not I can define 100%. And if a CTO is of the mindset that they're not going to be convinced to do the right thing, I have two choices: either figure out how to display 100% in a way that actually is sane, meaning 100% of reasonable coverage, or I have to quit, which is actually what I did in this one case, because they were relentless. And, they have, in the 4 years since I've been at that company, they have gotten no closer. In fact, that CTO is no longer there. So in my opinion, testing is a risk-based exercise. Testing is about identifying, mitigating, managing, eliminating risk. It is not about coverage. Coverage is an attempt to tell a story about risk, but it's an imperfect, flawed, reactive way to look at how you manage risk. And that's why I wanted to level set with us today, is that when I talk about testing, I do a little bit mean coverage, but I mean coverage as an input to figuring out where your risk exposure still is. Because you can think about accessibility in two different ways. You can think about it as, this is the right thing to do for me as a developer who wants to promote the usage of my software to everyone. I want to make my software accessible to everyone because it's the right thing to do, because people need to use my software to get something done. And there's a statistic that I could probably pull a reference to it, to a report called Every Experience Matters, which basically says that if you're making web software, 15% of web users need assistive technology in order to get daily tasks done. and that over 60% of those users are unable on a daily basis to get certain things done because the software they're using is not accessible. So people aren't thinking about this as they develop software, and they should be, because it's the right thing to do. On the other side of that, though, there's the reality of 2022, which is that if your site is not accessible, there is a great potential for litigation and lawsuits. In 2019, I think it was 2019, Domino's Pizza was sued because their website was not accessible and a person with visual impairment could not buy a pizza. And the Supreme Court of the United States declared that not having an accessible website for food ordering is the exact equivalent of not providing a wheelchair ramp to a brick and mortar store. So if your website is not accessible, you are not making it ADA compliant, and therefore you are at risk of being sued. And there is precedent now from the United States Supreme Court that says you're not going to win that lawsuit. So you can either fight this battle from the position of, I want to do the right thing for all of my users and potentially increase my market share as a bonus, or there is the risk of litigation on the other side that says, my job, my company is at risk. And I don't know if you've ever heard the term patent troll, something you can Google, but a patent troll is someone who is usually a small law firm that goes and finds patents that are being violated from one company to the next. And so they'll go to the company that's violating the patent and say, if you don't stop violating this patent, we're going to tell this other company that you're violating their patent, and you're going to get sued. Pay us a lot of money and we'll help you fix it. They also at the same time go to the company that holds the patent and says, this company is violating your patent. Would you like to pay us to sue them? And it happens both ways. There are now accessibility trolls growing in number by the day, looking for sites to sue that are not accessible. And this is becoming a huge issue everywhere. And if it's true in America, it is more true in Canada and Europe, because there are actually stricter standards for this that are more widely applied all over both continents. So if this is not currently an issue that you're thinking about, it's an issue that you need to start thinking about. And there's a chance that if you're in the QA organization or QE organization, there is another group entirely separate from you that is already thinking about this. But the way they tend to think about it, and I'll get to this here in a few minutes, is they tend to get to it late, right before the release happens. And you are in a uniquely good position to help them pull that earlier in the cycle and make sure that accessibility considerations are being covered early on instead of late. So people typically think of testing as looking for bugs. If you ask the average developer, the average person on the street, what is QA? Testing for bugs. I'm looking to see if something is broken. I was told that there's a requirement that a user gets to do something. I want to find bugs with that requirements, and I want to ensure that everything works. For example, they said the button would be blue, but it wasn't blue. And this is how people start in the industry. But what I always try to think is, and what has really helped accelerate my career, has been taking this one step further and saying, what effect does this have on the user? What effect does this have on my business if the user experience is bad? What effect does this have on my revenue if the user experience is bad for a huge swath of people, or even for a smaller swath of people who need assistive technology, but for whom I have not designed a sufficiently low contrast site that allows it to be usable by everyone? What I want is for people to start thinking about risk, not just coverage. So how this applies to accessibility is, what is the risk to my website or to my legal department if I have a site that is not showing sufficient color contrast to allow people to use the site the way they need to be used? And nowhere in there is coverage. I once had a team of brilliant offshore Selenium experts build a suite of 100 tests to work on the user profile editing page for the site that I worked on at the time. And I was so proud of them. The tests were durable. They weren't flaky. They passed. And if they failed for a good reason. Rare to have such good, high quality Selenium code. And I was having lunch shortly after that with an analytics person in business intelligence at Retail Me Not. Sorry, I just said the company name. That's all right. You can tell on LinkedIn that I work there. And they said, why in the world would you write 100 test cases for an area of the site that 1% of our users ever go to and that provides no revenue whatsoever? You have done a great job of coverage of a site that of an area of the site that presents zero risk to the organization if somebody just can't update their username or something like that. You could do a few tests for that, but there's no reason to write 100. So this is all about spreading the surface area of the test automation to apply to the biggest areas of risk, and to be able to say going into a test suite, it's not I ran a bunch of tests and here's what the coverage was. It was, I know going into this what risks I am covering and what risks I am letting go of. It's not a reactive outcome. It's a proactive statement. And that's how we should be thinking about accessibility. Because, like I said, you now are held to the same standards as a brick and mortar place that does not have a wheelchair ramp. Design cannot rescue failed content, which means if you're doing this so late in the process that you need to completely redesign the site, redesigning the site after it's done, it can't save you. You have to do it little by little. You have to change the engine inside the running jet plane. You have to make sure that it's a very slow process, very painful if you're getting to it that late. The truth is, most people are getting to it that late. So you have to work really hard to make sure it's correct. Now, there's a lot of different standards that apply. This actually is a very abbreviated list. WCAG, I don't recall what acronyms stand for. I almost never recall what acronyms stand for. I apologize. I don't know if it's an age thing or what, but it's something to do with the W3C standards for accessibility guidelines. I think that's mostly what those letters mean. You should probably decide where you are, where you want to go in terms of how accessible do you need to make the site. There are different compliance standards. If you're writing a blog that is purely informational with maybe some ads in it, you could probably go with single A. People with disabilities will find it. I mean, sorry, you shouldn't go with single A. You should go with double A. If you're single A, it means that people will find it impossible to access the information. You should shoot for double A, which means that I can't guarantee that everything will be on here, but at least I have made an effort to say that you can utilize my website. When you're a business or a government entity, you probably need to go with AAA, which means there's a really, really good chance that if you have a visual or hearing impairment, you will be able to use my website. So you need to decide upon the standards where you are. Are you A, going to AA, eventually going to AAA, or are you AA already trying to go to AAA? And the main mechanism for figuring this kind of thing out is an audit. Now, there are firms all over the world that do accessibility audits. One I in particular like is called DQ, DEQUE. They are a consulting firm that's a good partner with my company, and they will help you train developers on how to work within the accessibility guidelines to make your software accessible. And they will also do training. They'll do audits. And one thing that they do that I think is wonderful, that we're actually going to try to put out there for Selenium conference in March in Chicago, is they provide the ability to run something called an accessibility empathy lab, which lets you simulate visual impairments, hearing impairments, that kind of thing, and utilize web technology that is not accessible. So it's a poorly designed site that has no real good way of being used by someone with visual impairment, and they'll simulate the disability, putting a blindfold, something like that, and make you use the keyboard and not use the mouse, and use screen readers to understand what it's like for people who are using your site without good accessibility tools in it. And I think it's a wonderful thing for people to go through, and I can't wait. I've never actually been through it, but I hear wonderful things about it, because it puts you in the seat of the user who's just trying to get something done, just trying to order a pizza, something really simple. What if it was something really important like healthcare, managing medications, things like that? we need to understand how to do these things for our users. So as I referenced earlier, accessibility tends to be done kind of at the end, usually manually, right at the end, right before release. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a whole lot of extra things have to go into it. If it's like a lot of companies we work with, it's people who are not experts in accessibility and potentially people who don't have any sort of impairment or ability to understand the impairment itself. They're just told to look for certain things, and that's it. They're not experts. And then in my experience, also, when they do find an issue, it tends not to have the highest priority when it comes to getting fixed. So this is another issue that I think that, like most areas of testing, I think we need to start considering to shift left. How do we bring this earlier in the life cycle? We can do it via, I apologize for the low resolution of this image, but the link to it is in the bottom right. How do we work and weave accessibility testing and ideas into a design of a website as we're pushing it through its early phases? We can start on this as early as wireframe. There's no reason, if we have a clear vision of what our software needs to look like, we couldn't start attaching text and descriptions to even wireframe and placeholder images within our site, which then can be used by the developer as we move the software through to its more deployable state. There's no reason we couldn't start doing these things earlier. And if you think about doing 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there across 100 different wireframes early on in the process, how much time that will save later when we're trying to shoehorn and retrofit all of our accessibility descriptions later. There's no chance it will be as good if we're doing it, under duress, in a rush, toward the end of the cycle, when we're not the ones who designed it. Especially if you're in QA, there's a really good chance that it's going to be up to you to start doing commits to add alt text and IDs and labels to these different web elements, and that just seems like it's suboptimal in order to get these things in place when they could have been done much earlier. But the truth is, it requires a lot more comprehensive design to do this perfectly right, to get to AAA accessibility. And I think this is the way this is going to start moving in the industry, in my opinion. So one way I would advise QA people early in their careers to get started is to become an expert in this, and to start talking to your developers about this. Don't be annoying. Don't put it in their face constantly. What I would say is make contributions yourself, not just open tickets, but get in there and see what you can do to the code itself to make it more accessible. Come up with examples, put people through the empathy lab, or at least tell the story of the empathy lab if you're able to go through it, that kind of thing. Weave it in earlier. Now, I'm going to go through a list of these things. It's going to take a little while. Hopefully I have enough time. But 95% of accessibility problems come down to 10 accessibility issues. And I'm not going to show you how to automate 95%. I'm going to show you how to automate between 50 and 60% by using certain tools in combination with each other. Now, this won't save everything, and there's no way I can represent that if you do all of these things, you will be AAA compliant. For that, you should run an audit. But I do want to walk through the most common things that run through. And when I say these things, my hope is that you will actually start to, oh yeah, I know how to do that, or that's a thing that I've definitely seen on sites, and it's annoyed me even as a fully able person. I think that it's a good list, and I think it's really worth exploring, especially on your own time when you come out of here. So the first thing is image alt text. When you show an image on a site, people typically, one of the major assistive technologies that people use is called a screen reader. It's something that's made by Apple or Windows. Oh, thank you. I only have 15 minutes. All right, that's fine. I'll blow through these. So alt text is something that a screen reader will use to tell you what is happening inside of an image. So the flowchart I just showed you, the alt text would actually tell you not only what is in the image, but also why that image is significant, and try to do it briefly, succinctly, and that's why it takes time. It takes time to write a good, accurate, succinct description, a lot more time than it takes to write a long, bloated, very, very long description. So alt text in images is a very, very big deal for screen readers. Sometimes it's too verbose. Sometimes it takes away from the primary intent. Sometimes no alt image is provided at all. I used to do recording for the blind and dyslexic here in Austin, Texas. And when I would read, I'd come across an image, and you are instructed to provide a decent description of the image and try to make it no more than about 15 to 20 seconds. But you're trying to convey the main idea of the image itself. And that's what could be represented here in the alt text. If you don't use alt text, the image source will be read, which is going to be a URL, which it's going to sound like the screen reader saying http://something.com/ and you don't want that. That's terrible user experience. And sometimes the text is provided for an image that's purely decorative and should have an empty alternate attribute. So if you're doing a presentation, a lot of my presentations, not this one, a lot of mine have cat GIFs. And if I have a cat GIF in an image, there's no reason to populate that. That's just there for visual candy for people, so that they'll continue to listen to me while I'm talking, and they won't phase out or something like that. Yeah. So when we move on from that, there are also considerations for keyboard users, because people with visual impairments have trouble using a mouse in general. Not always, but that's a general statement. Keyboard users need to be able to tab and navigate using exclusively the keyboard, and to have an indicator of where focus is at the moment. Now, you should create a highlight somehow, letting the user know where these links are going, where they are, what form field they're on, something like that, where they know where the current input focus is. I have a link here to an article about this, and I assume we'll be sending these materials out to everyone. Proper labels on forms are a huge deal. You need to be able to, people need to be able to fill out forms and put the right text in the right field. And if you don't use proper labels, what you generally will get is you'll hear the screen reader will say text field, text field, text field, text field, text field, which is absolutely unhelpful. And you can imagine it's basically impossible to get done what you need to get done if you have to fill out a field, and that's all the screen reader can tell you. What you need to do, what you need to hear is first name, last name, phone number, a description for the different text fields that are in the form. Seems like common sense, but I see this all the time. Now, we need to have descriptive text for hyperlinks. There are so many hyperlinks in any given website. You need to put descriptive names on them, because otherwise they will read the URL to you, and that nobody wants that. And you also should try to stay away from saying click me, or click here, or click this for more information. You need to provide in just a few words the precise purpose or destination that the link is going to. And I understand that this is going to be difficult. It takes time, but the earlier you do it, the less you need to worry about it later. It is like eating your vegetables, but it's also like eating your vegetables when someone else's life depends on it. It's absolutely necessary to do this. Sometimes the link areas are too small. Do not force your users to do mouse target practice. That goes for any kind of disability. It goes for perfectly abled people as well. I hate target practice. I tend to hate it when form text fields don't use a fixed width font. So I can actually select the letter I without having to do a 3-pixel margin of error on that. So don't force people to play target practice with their mouse. Make the link space readable and easy to find. Tables are difficult. Tables are used for visual communication, but they're 2-dimensional, and screen readers are only 1-dimensional. So you have to use proper table HTML markup, and don't get super fancy with your CSS and JavaScript unless you also have markup, standard markup in the background that a screen reader can pick up on. I have seen the case where there's a div embedded within an iframe, within a div, within an iframe, within some other kind of proprietary component that's inside of a table cell, and the screen reader doesn't even know there's data in it. So that can become a huge problem. I might be exaggerating a tiny bit. So labels, simplified table structures, and style it however you want. Just make sure that the standard HTML code is in there somewhere as a cue for the screen reader. Heading elements are extremely important for organization of data for people who need a screen reader. People tend to use these purely for visual layouts and emphasis. You should be using notes, tips, and bolds and other kinds of fonts for other kinds of emphasis. Heading elements are not only really, really good for getting screen readers to help, but also they really help with SEO. Google has very, very exacting ways of indexing sites and favoring sites that have very well laid out content using H1 through H6. If you have more than one H1 on a page, your screen reader is going to be confused and your SEO will tank. That is a true statement. So make sure your pages are organized in a way that makes a lot of sense. Color contrast is another one. You need to make sure that the color contrast between web elements is 4.5 to 1 for text content, meaning you can't just have light gray on a white background. It needs to seriously contrast in order for people to be able to see it. 3 to 1 for interface elements. It's a lot more important to have high contrast for text than it is for buttons and other kinds of interface elements. But at a minimum, you need to have super high contrast for text on a page. Now, I have another link here that I will like for people to go to and visit, because it has a checker that'll actually tell you, whether or not a given URL is fitting within this or not. It'll flag your low contrast issues. So sometimes you want to embed a non-accessible document within your accessible document, and you need to hold other people accountable for this as well. You are, in a way, responsible for all the content that you have, but also all the content that you're embedding, even to an extent linking to, although if you've got 100 links to 100 different sites, of course you can't guarantee that they're all accessible, but it's still worth letting them know that they might have issues. Now, copy-paste problems happen all the time. I've seen this a lot, actually, where the same descriptive text appears on different resources because we just copy and paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, and we don't change the accessibility label to update. But just check for that. I believe that is something that a tool can also help with. For one thing, Appium automation commonly uses accessibility labels to disambiguate and find particular web elements, and Appium will freak out if you have the same label put on multiple elements, and that will be a good indicator for you that there's a problem there. And also, getting back to doing the right thing, if people hear the same description for multiple elements, how are they going to disambiguate between those things? So try to keep that in mind as well. Now, that was all 10. I blew through them. That's kind of amazing. I could probably talk for 10 minutes about each one, but that was the assignment I gave myself, was to talk about these 10 for you, because a lot of people have encountered these organically, but never really purposely gone through their own software scouring for these different kinds of things. And you can understand then why, if you have a release in 3 days and your job is to make sure that something is accessible and you're trying to go for AA compliance, there's no way at T-3 days you can apply all 10 of these concepts to all of the pages that are under your purview for testing. It feels to me like it would probably be impossible, and at the very least, it would be tedious as heck. It would be very toil focused, and after a while, you would lose focus and not really start to catch everything. And the other problem is that if you do a release every 2 weeks and you have to spend 2 to 3 days on this every 2 weeks, you have no chance of catching all the regressions that are going to come through if you're doing it manually. So how do we automate? We believe 50%, that's a little bit conservative, of issues can be caught using automation of some sort. I'll tell you a couple of tools to look for. But basically about test automation, these are the things that we all know. Testing very well is difficult. Testing that looks for regression is tedious. Your eyes are gonna glaze over. You're not gonna be able to focus very well. You're gonna lose your concentration. This kind of testing requires high energy involvement and enthusiasm and things like that you can't really maintain for huge periods of time especially if you have to do it very, very often. And then you think about how multiple platforms need to be covered, because if you make a site accessible in Chrome, there's a good chance it will automatically be accessible in Firefox and Edge and Safari, but it's not 100% guaranteed. And then you apply to things like mobile web browsers or mobile native applications, iOS, Android, screen readers on those things which are different, it becomes exceedingly difficult. So multiple platforms create this combinatorial explosion that makes comprehensive manual testing impossible. I don't usually like to make such absolute statements like that. I believe only Siths steal in absolutes, but this kind of testing becomes impossible. So automation can combine multiple checks into a single step and not miss any of them on repeat. This is what computers do. They're good at the toil part. What I find interesting about this whole chat GPT conversation and about the whole AI-driven test creation industry in general is that we are trying to automate the very hardest thing we can possibly automate first, which is, how do I replace the human in testing? And I think it's horribly misguided that that's our starting point for automation or for AI. AI should be helping us analyze what's already happened and then try to repeat those things to make sure that they don't happen again. Anyway, mini soapbox, I will get off of that. So complex business logic, API tests, all these kinds of things should be replicated constantly. That way you can test and commit all the time. So can your team actually check for accessibility regressions after every change? No. Different levels of training amongst products, developers, QA. Not everyone's going to find everything, and not everyone's an expert. Not everyone can be an expert. Everyone should know more, but not everyone can be an expert. So what do? We can't just test the happy paths. We have to look at how the UI renders the happy path, but then we need to check for error fields to have the right IDs. If you leave out the required phone number or last name field, does the error message have the ID and the label and the description text that it needs? Or is it just going to say, this field needs a value and the user has no idea which label it's attached to? It should say something like, required, first name is required, last name is required. It shouldn't just say, this field is required. So the next piece is screen readers themselves. I am a believer in testing the screen reader to an extent. I'm a believer in testing to make sure that the screen reader's keys that it uses to describe what's on the page are present. But keep in mind that Apple and Google created the screen reader, not your software developers. You are not testing the screen reader itself for bugs in the screen reader. You are testing to see if your application is implemented or instrumented, in order to be able to catch the screen reader in doing everything that needs to be done. So you do need to make sure, I do believe that there's a lot of work to be done in listening to the output of the screen reader, but don't try to trick or test or fool the screen reader because you're trying to test it. And I have, not with screen readers, but I've definitely gone down these rabbit holes before where I'm like, I'm going to test to see if PayPal can take this. Like, well, my job isn't to test PayPal as an external API. Not my job. My job is to test my software's interaction with the external component. So limit your testing of screen readers, but still you need to do it. Now, one thing I need to talk about that I think you should Google is there is a prominent company out there, I will not mention the name, that does accessibility overlays to say, if your site isn't accessible, we're going to install this piece that makes it to where it's accessible. It's called an overlay. It is not a developer-driven, pre-instrumented way of making your site accessible. It is a way of taking a site that's not accessible and making it accessible. I'm going to put that in scare quotes. These tools are not very good. They open you up to liability because they advertise that they will make your site accessible, but they absolutely will not cover everything, and they will leave you open to liability. And the New York Times has done a very comprehensive, good report on this particular topic. Now, when you Google New York Times web accessibility overlays, the first link at the top of the page will be a sponsored link, and it will be a sponsored link to the company that you should not use. read the article, get familiar with the concepts, and make sure that when you adopt a tool, that you actually adopt a tool that helps you verify, implement, do static analysis to make sure that accessibility is proper, but don't use overlay tools. They will open your company up to liability. I know you want to use them because it's pressing the easy button, and it's throwing money at something to make yourself sleep better at night, to think that you have solved your problem. But the truth is, you might have opened yourself up to a much bigger problem. Multiple companies have been sued after using these technologies. So don't risk it. And in general, I try not to test services I don't control. This applies to screen readers. This says, if I'm linking out to Facebook, I don't need to make sure that Facebook is accessible. I don't need to test Akamai or Adobe Analytics. Those are not my purview. I need to test that my system interacts with them properly, but they are external calls to external systems, which means you need to take a very risk-based approach, not a coverage-based approach to testing them. Includes internal microservices. If another team has published a contract, you need to test to make sure your software works against that contract, and that contract is constantly being tested to make sure it's complied with by the service. But it's only your job to report issues with how your system interacts with that, and to make sure that the other teams are held accountable for how their services are working with yours. So that's all I got. I do want to say that there's a company out there called Evinced, E-V-I-N-C-E-D, Evinced, that does a really good job of mobile accessibility testing. And then DQ, as I mentioned before, they have good mobile accessibility testing tools, as well as tools for web testing. In fact, they are the originators of the Axe Core toolbox that you can use and weave it into your Selenium tests in order to do web testing to make sure that certain things are complied with. Roughly, they'll cover those top 10 issues and give you a warning sign. This is a problem. Contrast is an issue here. This is missing an accessibility label, and it'll sort of give you these early warning signs. It does not constitute an audit, but it will give you early warning signs to say, I have these problems. I'm going to fix these before I do my audit. That way, the audit won't catch the easy stuff. So anyway, those are the tools I have. I want to echo Sudeep's point that Appium is underrated. I absolutely agree. Appium is actually kind of an amazing technology that it's got some downsides, got some upsides, but it's kind of amazing that it exists at all. Anyway, I could talk about all this stuff for hours, but please let me know if you have any questions. And thank you. I appreciate being here. I'm going to stop sharing now. Maybe Paul and I can get on at once and start talking about some stuff.
Yeah, cool. Marcus, thank you so much for that presentation. You covered a lot of things that are near and dear to my heart, which almost everything. No, I'm not going to say almost everything you said. I agree with you wholeheartedly. There is a company out there that does something that I don't want to say the name, but it's like copyright, but it's not copyright. There's another company, a very similar name with that
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned about. That link, the one you said, Evinced, I believe.
Yeah.
Do you have that link? We could probably post that. Maybe we can.
Let me see. I'm trying to remember if it's .com or .io.
If you can throw it in the chat, I can throw it over to let's say from. I'm not sure why my messaging is not working this from LinkedIn, but I can throw it in from.
I'm able to do the private chat, but not in the public.
There we go. I'll throw it over there. So it will essentially end up in our chat over here, so everyone can take a look at that. So this should pop up in our chat, so you can see Evinced over there. In 1 second, it should pop up. Seeing if it, well, it did before. When I said there was like 15 minutes for questions. Not a lot of questions coming through over here. Like, so we'll chat. I did have one for you. If you mentioned on page 20, you had a link to what you were talking about on your item over there. So
yeah, the contrast checker.
Yeah,
I just posted that.
And for some reason, I'm going to go. I'm wondering if links are getting kind of blocked over here from the YouTube channel. maybe our guys on the back, maybe on the back end, they can grab those links and throw them into the chat. Let's see, link.
We could talk about the fallacy of 100% test coverage.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I actually, Mark, I think the last 2 months I've been looking for a new job, and I did finally land one. I'm just gonna,
right. Congratulations.
try and jinx it. Thank you. But one of the best parts of the interview was I was talking to the manager, and I said, how much automation are you looking for, and how are you looking to check those numbers? And he said, I'm looking for 80%, and I'm like, great. And I I don't have to talk you off a ledge off of 100% automation, which is fantastic. The other thing that you were saying earlier on was that you asked, well, can I define what that is? Generally, what I will do is I'll say, there's like 3 different ways we can look at this. It's the code coverage, requirements coverage, or test case coverage. I think that's the third. And try and encourage somebody to pick one. Don't try and go through all 3. But I don't know of anything at the moment that really shows code coverage in testing very much. Any tools? I'd ask you. Do you know of anything?
It's funny. I did this once in my career in 2010, and I haven't been able to replicate it since. But it's because it was an entirely Java everything, back end, front, everything was Java. And what we did was we instrumented the WAR file that represented the application. We instrumented that using a tool called Cobertura, which is, I don't even know if that's still around anymore. And then we ran our Selenium tests against the site while it was instrumented, and it would actually tell us a report. Here's what the Selenium tests covered, and here's what they didn't cover. But in the world of React and Vue and all the new JavaScript technologies, I kind of have no idea whether or not these things are done anymore. There is a company called Sealights that attempts to give you information about test coverage at a code level. I have not used it, but I'm a big fan of the promise of it. Sealights. Actually, I think we're going to do a joint webinar with them soon, in fact.
Cool. I had a similar experience. It was actually on my first automation project working for a medical device manufacturer, and they instrumented their code, and it slowed it down about 30%. And the great thing was that I'd already figured out at that point, even though it was like my first year in automation around 2001, that I needed to have my framework basically anticipate that the system's going to take some load and slow down. And then they came back and they said, you're covering about 60% of the code that's out there, but the more cool stuff is that we found a bunch of functions that aren't called anywhere. There's unreachable code, which is great for us. And then they ran away. I'm like, okay, cool.
Deleting code is one of the most satisfying things you can do. I spent the first 10 years of my career trying to write more and more code, and the last 10 years trying to delete it.
Oh man. So we covered Everett's. We covered that other link. Trying to think of what else. This is great on accessibility. It's just not a lot that we think about when we're thinking about how can people who are disabled have some sort of disability still have the ability to interact with our websites. About the biggest one that comes up to my mind that we were checking with a couple companies was being colorblind, and then you can't quite tell if you got red text on a green background; it looks all gray.
Yeah,
and people are colorblind on that.
Yeah, my company, Sauce Labs, is actually in the midst of changing our fundamental color palettes because of this issue. Because our primary color in the past has always been red, and it's just not a good color to use. So, yes. And also somebody pointed out that red is usually the color of test failure. So shouldn't we shy away from red?
Yeah, I've seen systems where it's like it's reporting something out in red, and it's like some sort of success or an info. I'm like, this is not a warning. It should not be a red. Pick a different color, gray, green, whatever. But I don't know. Tell me a little bit more about Sauce Labs. Tell everyone what does Sauce Labs do?
Well, we are trying to make everyone's life easier through test automation. We have an AI automation tool, but we don't really push it very much. Mostly we acquired it for like research purposes. But our main thing that we do right now is we help people to do automation at scale by providing mobile and web virtual machines that you don't have to futz with at all. So if you have a team of mobile engineers and you need an iPhone 7 because some person is still using an iPhone 7 and can't buy something, it's like, well, you could find one on eBay, like maybe someone will have one lying around. But Sauce Labs, we got a couple hundred. Still, hey, there you go.
Hey, that might be one right there.
It's funny. I've got somewhere on my desk here. I've got a 4. It doesn't work.
I'm a bit of a hoarder, as you can tell. I keep all my stuff. In fact, I got my one of the cups. I think this actually came from this conference because I was looking through the that conference from 2004 that we met at, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I spoke at every conference, but my name is not in that book anywhere. And I realized my company name at the time, Spherion, is actually in the book. So I'm like, oh yes, I was running the booth, and we're getting really excited here because I'm dropping stuff. So
no, that's cool. That mug is kind of a flex, I think.
And the Captain Mercury, yes, that's what I'm trying to do.
But so I mean, we have a device cloud of something like over 5,000 real devices. Wow. And so if you have a whole bunch of Espresso, XCUI, Appium tests, and you're having to plug in an iPhone or using a local emulator and run them serially, like send them over to us. We can, we'll run the same set of iOS tests on 8 different iPhones in parallel and have the results back in seconds, not 3 days or whatever it might normally take. And not only that, you don't have to. Usually what I find is that people, and I had this before in my previous job, there's a rack of phones and iPads, and you pull out the one you need and the battery's dead because someone forgot to plug it in. And so you plug it in, you wait 20 minutes, it boots up, it's on a two versions ago of the iOS. You have to update that. Then you have to install the app. You have to delete all the previous data from the previous instance. And so you're an hour into this before you even start to get testing on it. And it's like with our stuff, it's just you push a button and boom, device, upload your app, you're go. And it's just when I was in QA, the reason I came to Sauce Labs is 2 reasons. One, because when I was in QA, I really needed something like this. And I was a Sauce Labs customer, and I just thought, this just isn't good enough. I want to go there and make it better. So that's kind of what I'm here to try to do. My feeling is customers have run over 5 billion tests on our platform over the past 12 years, 5 billion. And we should be doing something with that data. And we're starting to put out statistics like for major financial customers, people who run tests that take on average less than 2 minutes have a much lower failure rate. Like we're able to take data from all these tests and correlate and collate and make sure that we can make statements like, if you are running faster, more autonomous, more granular tests, you will have a better failure rate and you will be able to release to market faster. That kind of thing. I think it's super exciting.
Cool. And one of the things that to let our listeners know is that when you describe that, why would you want to go to all these different mobile devices and older versions of mobile devices? There's a term out there which is there's vertical testing and horizontal testing. Vertical testing is adding more tests to your test stack. Horizontal is going out onto all sorts of other mobile devices that are out there and trying to get those edge cases. As Marcus said, there's somebody out there who's still got an old iPhone, but we want to make sure it still works for them, which is a great way to find coverage on that. I think we're up at our time limit. It is 12 noon Chicago time over here. Marcus, again, I want to thank you very much for you joining us and giving us this presentation. It was great to see you again. And we have a chance to get to, maybe work together on some stuff in the near future.
Yeah, Selenium conference in Chicago in March. Hope to see you there.
Hey, you got a date for that?
It's like the 23rd, I believe, but I could be right. It's the 20-something of March.
March 20-something. Hey, yeah. Well, that's my hometown, so I will be there. I'll get out there and we can hang out. And also, I promise I will not run up to you and show you a picture of Will Roden and his kid and claiming it's you. You were very nice saying, oh, "Yeah, you idiot, that's not me."
We look a little bit similar. I get it.
I was like, your hair's straightened out a little bit. No, my gosh, that's not the same. Wait, funny. One question I do have before we go, 1 minute over. How did that website with you and Will? How did you guys meet to come together and decided to put that thing together?
The 5-second story is that we worked at the same company and got to know each other using Mercury QTP, and we hated the product so much. We just were pushing every boundary it had, and decided that there were other people out there who needed to do the same thing. But the truth is, the moment WebDriver came out, within 48 hours, we made a decision to trash Mercury and go with Selenium WebDriver. Yeah. And we, by the way, everybody,
there was the first time I saw a automation framework, it was two of them named. One was SIFL, SIFL, which you can see a little bit about that on the old on the website, which is only, like I said, only accessible through Internet Archive. And then there was another called Saffron. I think you guys were all talking about for a bit, which was just an amazing keyword-driven thing that was out there. I don't know how much you had on to do with Saffron, but you were promoting it.
Didn't work on it. Used it. It was good.
It was cool for UFT long before anybody knew what Selenium or WebDriver or anything like that was.
Yep.
All right. With that, we're 3 minutes over. I'm going to wrap that up again. Thank you very much, Marcus. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining and watching the presentation over here. We will catch you next month, and then in February we're going to have Larry come back, and he's going to be hosting the events. Next month I have another friend of mine from another company that's going to come in, and you'll enjoy her presentation as well. With that, I'm going to say goodbye, good luck, stay safe, and have yourself happy holidays.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.